Hey gang, just want to say hello to you all. Looking at this second video review of the RXB 250. It's middle of July of 2020. Had the bike now since October 2019, so a little over 6 months. And I'm happy to report it's been awesome. There's really been no problems with it. I'm going to address a lot of upgrades and things. I'm going to share some information with you further in the video. But just in the beginning here, there's going to be a couple things I have to address because the importer has kind of changed some of the things that they're doing. I bought a pure dirt version of this bike, a trail bike if you will. And they don't seem to be offering that too much anymore. Even if they do that, offer it in that way, in that configuration. What I've been seeing is more of a dual sport bike. They have what they call the RXB 250L, and it has lights, blinkers, horn, and emissions. It's got like a air recirculation pump for emissions. And it has a cat inside of the header pipe. I'll address it again later, but just to get into review now of this bike. I have approximately 32 hours on the bike total now, and have had only two real problems. The first being a broken bolt on the brake side where it mounts to the bars. The bolt was stripped from the factory. I didn't over tighten it, I tightened it, and because it was like cross threaded, kind of stripped in there, it just ended up breaking the head off. So I had to drill that out, tap it, and get another one. The second issue I had, I don't blame Orion for, but it is something people need to be aware of. I destroyed both of my rims, front and rear, but that's because I ride this bike on a motocross park. It wasn't designed for that. The spokes were not the right size. The way I got it, it had steel rims. They've since upgraded them to aluminum rims, but the spokes and the nipples are still small, and I have heard of people having a failure even with aluminum rims. So what I did was switch to Tusk brand spokes and rim, front and rear. Front is a Honda. I got a 2014 CRF 250 front rim, and the back is a 2014 Honda 450X. It's an 18-inch rear, so that was what I went with back there. And I just put the spokes in, I relaced them into the stock hubs. There is an alternative, there are a couple alternatives. Recently found out that full Honda rims and spokes and the hubs themselves will work for this bike, but you will need to get spacers, and I'm not going to go in depth into it here. You can find it on the Facebook page about the Orion RXB 250. Speaking of Facebook page, I've started my own. There was one already existing, but I'd really like to direct anybody that has the RXB 250 or 250L to my new page. You'll find the most information, and it'll weed out all this stuff for the smaller bikes. That new group is Orion RXB 250 Owners Group in Facebook in the groups. Okay, back to the review. So after owning it a while, we found out some things about it. The engine is a clone of a Honda CRF 230. So it's 223 cc's. It has a 65.5 millimeter bore stock and produces about 18.5 horsepower, give or take. Most people will find that fine for the trails. You can even do like single track, enduros, off-road. It should be fine for you. It's a little, after riding it, mostly on motocross tracks, after I had done some trail riding on it, and you can see some videos that I've posted about that, but I found that the power was a little bit lacking for me for motocross. So I went in search of answers for power. You can see in one of my other videos that I had tried a 32 millimeter carburetor and found that to be just absolutely pointless. This engine can't pull that kind of fuel through it without an accelerator pump. So I went back to the Nibby, which is an option that you can buy from Orion. Mine happened to come stock. It's a 28 millimeter Nibby carb. And with that, I found increased power throughout the range. It helped bring it back to life. While also searching for more power, I came across a gentleman, Joe Henner, and you can find his Facebook page at Henner Motorsports on Facebook. He's come up with quite a few things. I'm going to just lightly touch on all of the things that he can do, but in general, he can take this bike from 18.5 horsepower up to about 27, 28. Depends on how much you really want to spend on the mods. But here's a list of things that he's done, and all of which I recommend. He created a 4-degree advanced timing flywheel key, which just opens up this bike so much. And he only sells it for like less than $20. It just brings everything to life. You're essentially burning the fuel more efficiently, so it's actually a horsepower gain. I've never seen the numbers, but you can definitely feel it throughout the whole range, from the very off throttle all the way to the top end in 5th gear. He's got a cam, which is awesome. It gives plenty of mid-range and over rev, which some of these other companies don't give you, and also builds from the bottom, but it's essentially a mid and up real boost. He makes a thinner head gasket for the stock bore, which increases the compression by 1, so it brings it to about 10.5. He's also offering a big bore kit with a new piston, and that brings your compression almost to 12 to 1, and still can run on pump gas. All of this runs on pump gas. He does some other mods, obviously porting. He does what he calls rifle boring a carburetor, which takes out a little lip in the back. So anyways, all of this stuff, if you're going to really be competitive, or not even competitive, that's the wrong word. If you really want max horsepower, it will work for your 250Ls, which are the street, the dual sport street versions. But he and I are both testing it as motocross. Another big improvement, guys, I won't get into all the different variations, but changing your overall sprocket gearing. I'm currently running a 1250, which tightened everything up for me, which made it really good for coming out of corners on a motocross track. But also a 1350, if you do the big bore, will help out a lot. That's basically the idea. If you're not doing the big bore, if you're sticking with the same with the standard size piston, but you're going to go with the thinner head gasket and some other mods, then 1250, if you're just doing track, is the way to go. 1350 if you do the big bore kit. The L models is a whole different story. You're doing this for the street. So the biggest sprocket on the front that you can place on there without rubbing your chain guide and rubbing the very front edge of the backside of the stator, basically, is a 13, is as large as you can go. In the back, I've heard people go from 43s, 44s, 47s. I think that's something that you just would have to research more from people who actually have the RXB 250L model. So getting back into back into review again. The suspension we have found out to be pretty good, especially if you're under 100. If you're under 175 pounds, the springs are optimal for you. There's people that ride that are heavier than that. I'm heavier than that. Especially off-road, it's not really a problem. You can set it up. It's soft, and it'll work really. It works exceptional, to be honest, for what it is and what you're paying for. For this bike that's only, still under $2,000, or right at $2,000, I think might be the cost now in 2020. The suspension is amazing, but you will need to get, I would recommend a fluid change, especially on the front forks. The ideal weight is 5-weight Maxima 5-weight oil is what most people are recommending and using. And the amount of cc's for optimal amount of oil is between 325 cc's and 350 cc's, somewhere in that neighborhood. Depending on how heavy you are, you want to be closer to the top of that if you're heavier. The max that it will take is 375. After that, you'll start blowing fork seals. It's too much. A couple of people have contacted me who've actually changed out theirs, and it was also the case for me. From the factory, they're all over the map. I've heard as much as 400 and some odd cc's in there, and as little as 250. So like I said, ideally, the range for the oil, 5-weight Maxima, is between 325 cc's and 350 cc's. Most people under 175 pounds. That'll get you optimal. Everything else above that, you're starting to get into, really getting into a need of spring, and we haven't been able to source heavier springs for this yet. It has to do with the COVID and getting stuff from China. Eventually we'll have the ability to get those springs, heavier springs, but just remember, it's definitely a non-issue for off-road. Like if you're doing single track, it's in a good way. There's many guys on here that are above or right at 200 pounds doing single track and have no problem with the suspension whatsoever once they've set it up for themselves. There's little minor things that every motorcycle has. Mine had a little issue with the chain not being lined up correctly on the chain guide. So I had to kind of Dremel out a hole a little bit bigger in the chain guide where a screw mounted onto the swing arm to get it straight. Everything needs to be gone over. I'll tell people this till I'm blue in the face. These bikes, no matter what prep you pay for from Orion, you still need to go through and tighten every bolt, tighten all your spokes, go through and just make sure all your electrical connections are connected. I put dielectric grease in my connectors so that they don't rust. Make sure your chain is adjusted good. Go through all the, everything. Make sure you oil your air filter. Wow, man, just everything in prep. I found by going and taking my bike basically apart in the beginning, that it saved me multiple problems in the 6 months that I've had it. The bearings in the head stay are not greased very well from the factory. The linkage on the suspension obviously needs to be re-greased. I would do that anyways. It's good to do it. Get better grease in there and make sure that you've got everything tightened. The sprocket bolts, some people have said that they've not been aligned correctly and they've not been tightened correctly. Just, go over those, make sure they're good. Going back to the rims and the tires and the spokes, if you're just riding on the streets and maybe some fire roads and maybe light off-road, the stock rims and tires, stock rims and spokes will be fine. Just make sure that you tighten them, and I don't mean tighten them correctly. There is a pattern, you can find it all over YouTube. You don't just grab one and follow one after the other after the other. You're skipping spokes to make it tighten evenly. Like I said, look it up on YouTube. There's this actual way that you have to tighten the spokes correctly. But just to make this video, to bring this to a conclusion, I've had this thing 6 months, dollar for dollar. It's the best value out there. I have maybe 2,800 in it now. I bought mine for a little bit less than 2,000. That's including a lot of mods, cam, big bore kit, sprockets, chains, the list is kind of long. But you don't have to do all those things. But getting back to the point of the value, I spent a lot of time online, and I've definitely had some discussions with people who've disagreed with me. They wanted to go on to my site and also on the Facebook group and kind of have discussion about Japanese bikes being way better, for the money. Well, I've looked this up, guys. I'm not yanking your chain on this. Yes, you can probably find a good two-stroke. You're still going to have to do a lot of work, because between $2,500 and $3,000, you're not even going to find one that's 10 years old. If you do, you've found a gem. And who knows what it's like? It's used. It's a dirt bike. It's going to get beat up. 10 years of that kind of abuse. This being a brand new bike, you get it 2020, 2019, whichever year you're looking at this, $2,000, maybe plus tax to your house. Brand spanking new. With a reliable engine technology that's been tested for decades. This engine has been around in all different configurations, and especially overseas, it's been very popular overseas. I got a guy that does engine work who has over 100 hours on this thing. No problems, hasn't even changed the piston rings out. No problems with it whatsoever. So the engine is dead on reliable. You're not talking about anything that's complicated. It's an air-cooled, overhead cam, 2-valve, basic engine. It doesn't get much simpler than this as far as having a dirt bike or an off-road bike, trail bike, dual sport, whatever you want to configure it as or call it. This thing is an exceptional value, and you're getting a ton for your money. It's that CRF 230 engine clone is basically wrapped in a 2013 to 2015 KTM frame. It's a little bit different because the engine's, this engine's bigger and different, but basically besides a little bit deeper in the frame rails, that's what you have. You basically have a CRF 230 put inside a KTM frame. The plastic's held up. I haven't broke any plastic. Haven't broke anything. It's just been amazing. The wheels, you know, I chalk that up to I never should be out. I never should have really taken this thing out on a motocross track. I've taken it on the motocross track to prove to you guys that it can handle it. That's the main reason. You know, I'm not some speedster out there, and I do enjoy a motocross track, but it's more just to prove the durability of the bike. And like I said, this thing has held up great. You know, you may question my 30 hours, but remember, that's 30 hours on a motocross track. And how I got there was basically riding motos. We get a chance to go about 15, 20 minutes at a time. And then you get to do that, you know, how many times a day? Maybe 3 or 4 times a day when you're at the track day. So think about that as far as how long it takes to get 30 hours, and you'll realize I've actually put a lot of time and a lot of effort into this bike. And if you take Joe Henner's dyno time and his own personal track time, he's over 100 hours, both of us with no real failures. You know, he also changed out his rims too, but that was precautionary. So I'd like to invite you guys to really consider this bike. Don't be afraid. Yeah, you might have to do some mods and make it a little different, you know, mod it up from stock to get to where you want to be. Even I was a little surprised that I had to do that. In the end, I was hoping I wouldn't have to go up so much, you know, go to a big bore, change the cylinder and a bigger piston, but, you know, for me, in the scenario that I use it, yeah, it was needed. In the end, it was needed. It's getting me up there to that 27, 28 horsepower range, which is very competitive. It's not that bad. It's not a CRF 250R 4-stroke Honda motocross exact bike, but it's not bad. It's especially when you consider a lot of what makes working on a track the rider. When you get that kind of horsepower, you're starting to get up there to where it's competitive, or at least we're not going to get blown away and left in the dust. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Please like, subscribe, share this with anybody you think would like it. Feel free to hit me up in the comments, or go to my Facebook group. Again, that Facebook group is Orion RXB 250 Owners Group, Facebook groups. You'll find me there. Thank you much. I appreciate all your support. I appreciate when people, you know, want to comment with positive comments. I had some time where people were picking on my riding, but they didn't. I don't think people realize I'm 54 years old, and this bike was, a lot of the videos that I have put out there, the bike was underpowered. So pretty soon here in the future, I'm going to get my cam and big bore and piston installed in this thing, and we should see significant improvement. Again, y'all have a great one.